1974, one Halloween night in Texas turned from fun to fatal horror. What was supposed to be a night filled with laughter and excitement became one of the most notorious crime stories in American history. This is the chilling tale of Ronald Clark O'Brien, a man who used Halloween to commit an unthinkable crime. His actions that night would forever change the way families across America viewed Halloween, making his name synonymous with evil and betrayal. Ronald O'Brien appeared to be an average, hard-working father living in Deer Park, Texas. He had a stable job as an optician, a loving wife, and two beautiful children, Timothy, 8 years old, and Elizabeth, 5 years old. On the outside, everything seemed normal, but beneath the surface, Ronald was drowning in debt. His financial situation had spiraled out of control, and he was desperate for a way out. Behind closed doors, Ronald devised a plan so sinister that no one could have imagined what he was capable of. Knowing his life was falling apart, he saw only one way to escape his financial troubles: through his children's life insurance policies. In the months leading up to Halloween, Ronald had taken out insurance policies on both Timothy and Elizabeth, worth around $60,000, a large sum for him at the time. On the night of October 31st, 1974, Ronald took his children trick-or-treating in their neighborhood, along with a family friend and their children. As they went door to door, the children excitedly collected candy, dressed up in their costumes, unaware that the night would end in tragedy. At one point, the group approached a house where no one answered the door, and the children ran ahead to the next house. Ronald lingered behind, and when he caught up with them, he triumphantly held 5 large pixie sticks tubes, saying that the homeowner had finally opened the door and given him candy for the kids. He gave each child a pixie sticks, including his own son, Timothy. What no one knew at the time was that Ronald had carefully filled the tips of these pixie sticks with cyanide, a lethal poison. His plan was to make Timothy's death look like a tragic accident, part of a random act of Halloween horror. He hoped that by scattering the poisoned candy among several children, it would deflect suspicion away from him. Later that night, after returning home from trick-or-treating, Timothy asked if he could eat one last piece of candy before going to bed. Ronald handed him the pixie sticks he had given him earlier. Timothy struggled to get the powder out of the tube, so his father helped him open it. Within moments of swallowing the candy, Timothy began to complain of a burning sensation in his throat and intense stomach pain. His condition worsened rapidly, and he started vomiting uncontrollably. Terrified, his parents rushed him to the hospital. But it was too late. Timothy O'Brien was pronounced dead less than an hour later. The doctors were baffled, but the toxicology report soon revealed that Timothy had ingested a lethal dose of cyanide. The police were immediately called, and the investigation into the tragic death began. At first, the entire community was gripped with fear. The idea that a deranged killer was poisoning Halloween candy spread panic throughout the country. Parents were horrified, and many rushed to hospitals to have their children's candy tested. It seemed like every parent's worst nightmare had come true. But as police began investigating the details of Timothy's death, certain things didn't add up. They questioned Ronald and his story about receiving the pixie sticks from a neighbor. When they tracked down the owner of the house where Ronald claimed to have gotten the candy, the man said he hadn't even been home on Halloween night, and the lights were off, making it unlikely anyone would think to trick-or-treat there. As suspicions grew, investigators discovered Ronald had recently taken out life insurance policies on both his children. They also found that he had inquired about cyanide at a chemical supply store and talked to people about how much cyanide it would take to kill a person. It didn't take long for the police to connect the dots. Ronald O'Brien had poisoned his own son in a cold-blooded plot to cash in on the life insurance money. In June 1975, Ronald O'Brien stood trial for the murder of his son. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and it painted a horrifying picture of a man willing to sacrifice his own child for financial gain. During the trial, the prosecution revealed that Ronald had not only planned Timothy's death, but had also tried to poison several other children by handing out additional poisoned pixie sticks to other trick-or-treaters in the neighborhood. Fortunately, none of the other children had eaten the candy. The jury took just 46 minutes to find Ronald O'Brien guilty of murder. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection. On March 31, 1984, nearly a decade after the murder, Ronald O'Brien was executed, leaving behind a legacy of terror that would never be forgotten. The murder of Timothy O'Brien shocked the entire nation and forever changed the way families approached Halloween. What was once a night of innocent fun became shadowed by fear. Many parents began inspecting their children's candy closely, fearful that another tragedy could strike. The story of the Candy Man became one of the most infamous Halloween crime stories in history, and Ronald O'Brien's name will always be associated with betrayal and horror.